Die Glocke? The year is 1944. Deep beneath a castle in occupied Poland, SS scientists are testing something that shouldn't exist. It's called Die Glocke, the bell. 9 feet wide, 12 feet tall, filled with a violet glowing substance they codenamed Xerum 525. When activated, it spins counter-rotating cylinders at impossible speeds. The air shimmers. Time itself seems to bend. Then the test subjects, plants, animals, and reportedly men, begin to decay from the inside out. This isn't science fiction. This is testimony extracted from Jakob Sporenberg, an SS officer interrogated by Soviet intelligence after the war. Polish journalist Igor Witkowski claims he saw the classified NKVD documents in the 1990s, documents describing a bell-shaped device housed in the Wenceslas mine near the Owl Mountains, underneath the Chonch Castle complex. Nick Cook, aviation editor for Jane's Defense Weekly, investigated the site in 2000 and found something historians can't explain away. A concrete structure, circular, 100 feet in diameter, with ceramic hooks evenly spaced around its perimeter. It's called the Henge. No one knows what it was for. No one knows why it was built in 1944, when Germany was desperately short of concrete, labor, and time. The details from Sporenberg's interrogation are disturbingly specific. The bell was made of hard, heavy metal. 2 cylinders spun in opposite directions at high speed while the device was powered. Test subjects placed near the operating bell showed cellular decomposition, crystallization of blood, breakdown of organic matter. At least 7 scientists died during testing, according to Witkowski's sources, their cause of death listed as radiation-like symptoms. The project went by the code names Kronos or Laternenträger, lantern bearer. It was overseen by SS General Hans Kammler, the man who also managed the V2 rocket program. In April 1945, Kammler disappeared. His body was never found. His fate remains unknown. The mystery deepens when you look at what happened at the site. In the final weeks of the war, the SS executed or disappeared at least 60 scientists and slave laborers who worked at the Wenceslas mine. This is documented separately from the Bell story. Why kill witnesses if there was nothing to hide? Before Soviet forces arrived, all documentation was removed, the facility was destroyed, and heavy equipment was evacuated. The Henge structure was left behind, scarred by blast patterns and damage consistent with high-energy testing. Most historians dismiss Die Glocke entirely. They argue it's based on uncorroborated testimony from a dubious source, documents Witkowski saw but couldn't copy. The Henge structure, they say, was likely an industrial cooling tower or a prototype for a never-built gasometer. The whole story, they claim, is Cold War legend mixed with post-war Nazi mystique, weaponized into conspiracy theory. No bell, no anti-gravity, no documents. Just ruins and speculation. But then why does the Henge structure exist at all? Built with such precision in 1944 when Germany was collapsing. Why spend concrete labor and time on an industrial cooling tower in a mine that wasn't producing anything? And why did the SS execute or disappear dozens of people who worked at this specific site if there was nothing worth hiding? Some researchers point to declassified U.S. documents showing American intelligence units frantically searching for Kammler and special weapons research in the final days of the war. Operation Paperclip brought 1,600 Nazi scientists to America, but Kammler, who oversaw both the V2 program and allegedly Die Glocke, was never found. Did he defect with the technology? One theory suggests the bell wasn't a weapon, but a failed propulsion experiment using mercury plasma vortex principles, real physics pushed beyond safety limits. Another asks, if it was all fiction, why does the physical site match Sporenberg's description so precisely? From buried Nazi experiments beneath stone, we rise into the air itself. Because during the war, pilots on both sides reported something even stranger, something they couldn't shoot down, couldn't outrun, and couldn't explain. The Foo Fighters. You're a bomber pilot over enemy territory. It's night, November 1944. Flak bursts around you over the Rhine Valley. Then you see it, a glowing orb, orange or white or red, pacing your aircraft wing to wing. You bank hard, it follows. You dive, it matches you perfectly. You radio command. They tell you we're seeing them too, but when you try to fire, it vanishes, reappears, dances. Then it's gone. Lieutenant Edward Schluter saw them first. So did Lieutenant Donald Myers, his radar observer, and Lieutenant Fred Ringwald, his intelligence officer. All three men from the 415 Night Fighter Squadron witnessed orange glowing objects on November 23, 1944. They filed official reports. The U.S. military codenamed them Kraut fireballs, believing they were German secret weapons. But German pilots were seeing them too, and they thought they were American weapons. Both Allied and Axis forces reported identical phenomena, thousands of sightings over 6 months. They called them Foo Fighters, a name borrowed from the Smokey Stover comic strip phrase, "Where there's foo, there's fire." The objects displayed flight characteristics impossible for 1940s technology. They could pace aircraft at 300 miles per hour, stop instantly, change direction at impossible angles, and pass through aircraft without causing damage. They ranged from 3 inches to 3 feet in diameter. Colors varied: red, orange, white, green. Sometimes they appeared in formation. Pacific pilots reported identical phenomena. Japanese pilots reported them too, each side thinking the other had deployed them. The War Department officially investigated from December 1944 through January 1945. Their conclusion: unknown origin. Time magazine covered them in its January 2, 1945 issue, quoting official military sources. Multiple pilots tried to engage the objects. They either vanished or simply outmaneuvered every attempt effortlessly. Despite thousands of sightings over more than 6 months, not a single Foo Fighter ever crashed or was recovered. And then, after May 1945, they stopped. They just stopped appearing. The official post-war conclusion was St. Elmo's fire, a weather phenomenon where electrical discharge creates glowing plasma around aircraft in certain atmospheric conditions. Others suggested ball lightning, reflections from ice crystals, or battle fatigue hallucinations. Skeptics point out these were young men under extreme stress, facing enemy fire in darkness, seeing things that weren't there. Mass hysteria, they say, amplified by wartime rumor mills. But St. Elmo's fire doesn't pace aircraft at 300 miles per hour for 20 sustained minutes. Ball lightning doesn't last that long or perform right-angle turns. Ice crystal reflections don't follow aircraft through evasive maneuvers. And if it was hallucination, why did both Allied and Axis pilots, who couldn't possibly coordinate stories, describe identical objects with identical flight behavior? Why did radar operators sometimes track them? And why did they suddenly stop appearing after the war ended? Some researchers suggest the Foo Fighters were experimental drone technology far ahead of its time, perhaps from a third party. Others point to the object's behavior, curiosity without aggression, and ask if they were observing humanity's first large-scale aerial warfare. A few scientists propose they were natural plasmoid phenomena, a rare atmospheric effect triggered by the unprecedented amount of electromagnetic radiation from radar and radio during the war, a phenomenon that vanished when those specific conditions ended. From unidentified objects in the sky, we descend to a very identified man who did something no one can explain, a man so high in Hitler's inner circle that his betrayal should have been impossible. Rudolf Hess's flight to Scotland. The deputy Führer of Nazi Germany steals a Messerschmitt Bf 110, flies solo 900 miles across enemy territory, bails out over Scotland with peace proposals, and then spends the next 46 years in prison, mostly in solitary confinement, refusing to explain why. Rudolf Hess was the third most powerful man in Nazi Germany. He helped Hitler write Mein Kampf. Then, on May 10, 1941, he took off alone, flew to Britain, and destroyed his own life. The flight itself defies easy explanation. Hess departed from Augsburg-Haunstetten airfield around 5:45 in the evening in a Messerschmitt Bf 110E1/N, serial number 3869. He flew across the North Sea using only radio beacons and dead reckoning, navigated at night through enemy airspace, and arrived within 12 miles of his target, the Duke of Hamilton's estate at Dungavel House. This wasn't a trained combat pilot on a routine mission. This was a political official executing a precision solo navigation that most pilots would have struggled with. Hitler's reaction was immediate and strange. The official Nazi statement on May 11th declared Hess was suffering from hallucinations and had acted alone. Göring ordered Hess's staff arrested. Hess's stated mission was that he had come to negotiate peace with a peace party in Britain, led by the Duke of Hamilton, a man he had never actually met. Churchill refused to see him. He was designated a prisoner of war and interrogated by M106. At the Nuremberg trials in 1945 and 46, Hess showed signs of amnesia. He couldn't remember the flight clearly. He behaved erratically. He was transferred to Spandau prison in 1947 and held there until his death. For the final 21 years, he was the sole prisoner after all others were released. He died on August 17, 1987, at age 93. Official cause: suicide by hanging with an electrical cord in a garden shed. His family contested this. British files on Hess were sealed until 2017. When they were finally released, key documents were missing or redacted. Many remained classified until 2041. Historians largely accept that Hess acted alone, driven by desperation and delusion. By May 1941, Germany was preparing to invade the Soviet Union. Hess, they argue, genuinely believed he could negotiate Britain out of the war before the Eastern Front opened. He was mentally unstable, politically naive, and catastrophically wrong. Hitler disowned him to avoid embarrassment. The British kept him imprisoned to prevent him becoming a martyr or propaganda tool. His death was the suicide of a broken elderly man who'd spent half his life in prison for a failed gambit. But the precision of the flight contradicts the delusional madman narrative. Hess wasn't a skilled combat pilot, yet he flew a twin-engine fighter at night over 900 miles without error. The Messerschmitt Bf-110 he used was modified with extra fuel tanks, installed before his flight, suggesting preparation, not spontaneity. And the Duke of Hamilton, whom Hess claimed to be meeting, was linked to pre-war British-German aristocratic networks that advocated peace. If it was delusion, why did British intelligence interrogate him so intensely? Why were files kept secret for 76 years and counting? One theory suggests Hess was responding to a British intelligence deception operation, fake peace feelers designed to lure him to Britain. Another claims he was on a genuine secret mission, authorized by Hitler's inner circle, meant to split Britain before Operation Barbarossa, but disavowed when it failed. The most controversial theory, supported by some historians, is that Hess brought a genuine peace offer: keep the British Empire intact, allow Germany free hand in Europe, which Churchill rejected but couldn't make public for morale reasons. His decades-long imprisonment wasn't about him being dangerous. It was about him knowing too much. From one man's mysterious flight, we cross the Pacific to a mystery that involves not one man, but billions of dollars and bodies that have never stopped falling. Yamashta's gold. In 1945, as Japan faced defeat, General Tomoyuki Yamashta allegedly hid what may be the greatest stolen fortune in history: over $100 billion in gold, platinum, diamonds, and artifacts looted from across Southeast Asia. They called it the Golden Lily Treasure. 75 years later, treasure hunters are still digging, and they're still dying. In 2019, a team excavating a site in the Philippines was buried alive in a tunnel collapse. In 2021, another group disappeared without a trace. The question isn't whether the treasure exists. The question is, who has it, and why people keep dying looking for it. The operation was codenamed Golden Lily, the Japanese name for systematic looting of Southeast Asian wealth from 1942 to 1945. It was allegedly overseen by Prince Chichibu, brother of Emperor Hirohito, and executed by General Yamashta. An estimated 12 Asian countries were plundered. Central banks, temples, private wealth, all confiscated and consolidated. Ben Valmores, Yamashita's driver, testified in 1992 that he helped bury 12,000 boxes of gold bars, each box weighing approximately 75 pounds, in tunnels throughout Luzon. He passed multiple polygraph tests about what he witnessed. The treasure broke into the legal system in 1996. Rogelio Roxas filed a lawsuit claiming that, in 1971, he had found a solid gold Buddha statue weighing 1 ton in a tunnel complex. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos sent forces to confiscate it. The Hawaii federal court heard the case and ruled in Roxas's favor, awarding $43 billion in damages against the Marcos estate, later reduced to $13 billion on appeal. The court's decision implied they found the treasure claim credible. You don't award $13 billion based on fantasy. Multiple sites show underground cavities, consistent with man-made chambers on seismic surveys. Some show metal mass anomalies. Several sites show evidence of booby traps, collapsed tunnels designed to flood or cave in, engineered deliberately to kill intruders. The Philippine government has issued permits for over 50 documented treasure hunting operations since 2000. Various Philippine officials have launched searches. Some claim small recoveries never disclosed publicly. In 2019, a father and son team was buried alive in a tunnel collapse in Bulacan province. Their bodies were recovered after 3 days. Most historians acknowledge that Japan looted occupied territories. That's documented fact. But they argue the Golden Lily treasure is vastly exaggerated. Most of the gold and valuables, they say, were shipped back to Japan during the war and are accounted for in Allied post-war recovery efforts. Yamashta was executed in 1946. Any burial he supervised would have been minor caches for use by stay-behind forces, not massive vault complexes. The Hawaii court ruling, skeptics note, doesn't prove the treasure's scale, only that Marcos confiscated something from Roxas. The treasure hunting deaths are tragedies caused by amateur tunneling, not evidence of vast riches. But the Hawaii court didn't just confirm something. It awarded damages based on expert testimony, valuing a single golden Buddha at over $1 billion and accepted evidence of a larger trove. Ben Valmores passed multiple polygraph tests, and the sheer persistence of Philippine government interest, including military-led searches in the 1990s and 2010s, suggests official belief in substantial treasure. Why would the government keep issuing excavation permits if there was nothing there? And if it's all fantasy, why do serious engineering firms keep finding underground chambers in the exact locations the treasure maps indicate? One theory holds that the United States recovered much of the treasure secretly after the war and used it to fund anti-communist operations in Asia, the so-called Black Eagle Trust. Another suggests Ferdinand Marcos actually found and sold major portions in the 1970s, using it to prop up his regime. The money allegedly went to Swiss banks. A third theory, popular in the Philippines, claims that treasure is still there, but the sites are monitored by Japanese veterans associations who've prevented recovery through intimidation, violence, or buying off local officials. From treasure buried in jungle tunnels, we turn to a body that was supposed to be buried in Berlin, but may not be Adolf Hitler at all. Hitler's remains. For 64 years, the Soviet Union claimed they had definitive proof that Adolf Hitler died in his bunker, a piece of his skull with a bullet hole and fragments of his jaw. The remains were stored in Moscow, tangible evidence that history's most evil man had met his end. Then in September 2009, researchers tested the skull. The DNA results came back. Female. Not Hitler. Suddenly, the cornerstone of the official story, the physical proof that Hitler died on April 30th, 1945, was wrong. If that was someone else's skull, whose body did the Soviets burn in 1970? And if Hitler didn't die in Berlin, where did he go? In April 1945, Soviet troops overran the Führer bunker. They claimed to find burned remains. In May, they announced they had Hitler's body, but never displayed it publicly. In 1970, the Soviets claimed they destroyed the remains, except for a skull fragment with a bullet hole and jaw fragments. These were kept in the Russian state archives as proof. Then in 2009, University of Connecticut researcher Nick Bellantoni conducted DNA and bone analysis on the skull fragment. Dr. Linda Strausbaugh performed the testing. The skull showed female DNA markers. Anthropological analysis confirmed bone thickness and suture patterns, consistent with a young female, not a 56-year-old male. The original Soviet claims were specific. Stalin told Truman and Churchill in May 1945 they had Hitler's body. A 1946 Soviet autopsy report claimed positive identification via dental records. Hitler's dentist and assistant were interrogated and provided dental charts. The Soviet autopsy claimed jaw fragments matched. These dental remains were never DNA tested. In 1970, the KGB reportedly exhumed remains from Magdeburg, burned them, crushed the bones, and scattered ashes in a river. They claimed it was Hitler. The skull fragment was kept separately, purportedly found near the bunker exit, with what appeared to be a gunshot exit wound. The FBI maintained 700 pages of files on Hitler's survival claims, released over decades. They took them seriously through the 1950s. Witness testimony from guards and bunker staff gave varying accounts of the body burning. Soviet interrogations of bunker survivors showed discrepancies in timeline. Most tellingly, Stalin himself told Western allies in 1945 that he believed Hitler escaped. He maintained public ambiguity for years. Most historians still believe Hitler died in the bunker on April 30th, 1945, despite the skull DNA controversy. They argue the skull fragment may have been mislabeled, perhaps from Eva Braun, Hitler's wife who died with him, or from another body in the bunker. The dental remains, which match Hitler's records, were never contested by the 2009 study. Witnesses testified to the suicide, the body burning, and Soviet recovery of remains. Hitler was a broken man, physically ill, trapped in a collapsing city with Soviet forces blocks away. Escape was impossible. The skull error, they say, is Soviet bureaucratic confusion, not proof of survival. But if the Soviets confused the skull of Hitler, the most important war criminal in history, how reliable is their entire chain of custody? Why did Stalin himself publicly doubt Hitler died? And why were the supposed remains destroyed in 1970 rather than preserved as historical evidence? The dental records are convincing, but they rely entirely on Soviet custody and Soviet interrogators. No Western expert ever examined the physical remains directly. If the skull was wrong, what else was wrong? FBI files document over 250 separate leads investigating Hitler's survival claims. Some placed him in Argentina, others in Antarctica, a few in Spain. The most detailed claim came from a 1945 FBI memo describing a submarine arriving in Argentina with Hitler and Braun aboard. While most historians dismiss these as hoaxes, the fact that Western intelligence pursued them for years suggests uncertainty. Another theory holds that the Soviets never had Hitler's body. They recovered and burned a double. Hitler had at least 4 confirmed doubles during the war, then realized their mistake, but couldn't admit it during the Cold War. The 1970 destruction wasn't about denying neo-Nazis a shrine. It was destroying evidence of their own lie. From a man whose death was supposed to be certain, we turned to an object whose beauty was once certain, and then it vanished into darkness. The Amber Room. They called it the 8th wonder of the world. A room made entirely of amber, 6 tons of it, glowing golden panels inlaid with mirrors, gold leaf, and precious stones, covering 592 square feet of walls. Built in 1701 for the Prussian king, gifted to Peter the Great. Installed in the Catherine Palace outside St. Petersburg. It took 10 years to construct. In September 1941, the Nazis dismantled it in 36 hours and shipped it to Königsberg. It was last seen in April 1945. Since then, it has vanished. Despite 75 years of searching, excavations, and treasure hunters dying in pursuit, no one has found a single amber panel. 6 tons of artwork, photographed, documented, and worth over $500 million today gone. The original room was designed by Andreas Schlüter and constructed from 1701 to 1711 in Prussia. In 1716, Frederick William I gifted it to Peter the Great of Russia. It was installed in the Catherine Palace. On September 14th through 16th, 1941, German Wehrmacht construction battalions disassembled the room. German military records confirm this. They packed it into 27 crates. German rail records show the shipment arrived at Königsberg Castle in October 1941. It was reassembled in the Castle Museum, photographed on display from 1942 to 44, visited by Nazi officials, documented in German press. Alfred Rode, the castle curator, and his wife both claimed to have seen the Amber Room as late as April 1945. Both died of typhus weeks later. The castle was struck by RAF bombing raids in August 1944. The interior was damaged, but the Amber Room galleries reportedly survived. In April 1945, the Red Army entered Königsberg. The castle burned during the battle. Soviet reports claim the Amber Room was already missing. Soviet teams searched the ruins from 1945 to 46. They found fragments of amber and flooring, but no panels. The room's physical scale makes the mystery more profound. 592 square feet of panels, weighing approximately 6 tons, consisting of 565 candles worth of amber, approximately 100,000 individual pieces. This wasn't a painting you could roll up. This was an entire room of carved, inlaid panels, each distinctive, each fragile. Dozens of excavations have occurred since 1945. Multiple sites have been claimed: mines, bunkers, ships. None yielded panels. Russia built a replica from 1979 to 2003 at a cost of $11 million, unveiled at Catherine Palace in 2003. Historians believe the Amber Room was destroyed during the 1945 battle for Königsberg. The castle burned. Amber is highly flammable. Soviet troops and German civilians alike looted what remained in the chaos. The panels, if they survived the fire, were likely shattered or stolen piece by piece and sold on black markets. The few amber fragments found in the ruins support the destruction theory. The room was too large to move in the final months of the war when Germany was in full retreat. It's tragic, they say, but not mysterious, just another casualty of war. But amber burned slowly and the castle had stone walls and vaults. If the room was destroyed by fire, why were no large amber remnants found? Only tiny fragments. And if it was looted piece by piece, why has not a single one of the 565 distinctive panels ever surfaced in 75 years? Amber is unique. The Amber Room panels were carved with specific figures, patterns, and engravings. They can't be melted down like gold. Any dealer would recognize them instantly. Treasure hunters have proposed dozens of locations: mines near Königsberg, a sunken ship in the Baltic, bunkers in Thuringia, even a well near Weimar. In 1997, German authorities recovered a single mosaic from the room, found in the possession of the son of a Wehrmacht soldier, proving some pieces did survive. This reignited searches. Some believe the Soviets found the room in 1945 and hid it to avoid admitting they'd let it be damaged or stolen. Others think it was secretly shipped west before the fall of Königsberg, hidden by Gauleiter Erich Koch, who was captured in 1949, but never revealed its location. A few researchers suggest it was moved to the Mamerki bunker complex in Poland, where ground-penetrating radar has shown large underground chambers, still unexplored. From a treasure lost in fire, we travel to the coldest place on Earth, where Nazi explorers allegedly built something that wasn't discovered until after the war ended. Nazi Antarctica Expedition and Base 211. In 1938, Nazi Germany sent an expedition to Antarctica. They mapped 600,000 square kilometers of unexplored territory, claimed it for the Reich, and called it Neuschwabenland. They dropped thousands of metal swastika markers to stake sovereignty. Then they left. In 1946, the United States launched the largest Antarctic expedition in history, Operation High Jump. 4,700 men, 13 ships, 33 aircraft, led by Admiral Richard Byrd. Officially, it was research and training, but the mission was supposed to last 6 to 8 months. It ended abruptly after 8 weeks. When Byrd returned, he gave a cryptic interview to a Chilean newspaper. He warned that America needed to prepare for an invasion by aircraft from pole to pole. What did they find in Antarctica? The German Antarctic expedition ran from December 1938 to February 1939, led by Captain Alfred Richer aboard the MS Schwabenland. The ship carried two Dornier Do-24 flying boats. They photographed approximately 350,000 square kilometers of previously unmapped Antarctic coastline. They discovered ice-free warm water lakes heated by geothermal activity. Germany formally claimed Neuschwabenland, the territory between 20 degrees east and 10 degrees west longitude. They dropped metal swastikas across 600,000 square kilometers to mark sovereignty. 7 years later, Operation High Jump deployed 4,700 personnel as Task Force 68. It included the aircraft carrier USS Philippine Sea, the icebreaker USS Burton Island, and the submarine USS Senate. The official mission: training exercise and establishing U.S. Antarctic Research Station Little America 4. The operation was planned for 6 to 8 months, the austral summer of 1946 to 47. It terminated after 8 weeks in February 1947. Multiple aircraft crashed. At least one pilot, George Vance, was killed. Several crew were injured, unusual casualties for a research mission. On March 5, 1947, the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio quoted Admiral Byrd, warning of the potential for attack by aircraft flying from pole to pole. The operation was classified. Details remained secret for years. Byrd's expedition diary wasn't fully published. Operation Windmill immediately followed in 1947 to 48. Operation Deep Freeze in 1955 to 56 established permanent bases. All U.S. Antarctic efforts showed unusual military character. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. The German Antarctic expedition was legitimate scientific exploration with nationalistic overtones, standard for 1930s polar expeditions. The territory claim was symbolic. No permanent base was established. Operation High Jump was exactly what it claimed: a large-scale training exercise to test equipment in extreme cold, practice amphibious landings on ice, and establish Antarctic presence before the Soviet Union did. It ended early due to harsh weather, equipment failures, and the approaching Antarctic winter. Admiral Byrd's quote about pole-to-pole attacks was either mistranslation or Cold War rhetoric about future Soviet threats, not about Nazis. Base 211 is pure fiction, propagated by neo-Nazi mythology and conspiracy theorists. But why send 4,700 men and 13 ships for training to the most remote continent on Earth barely a year after the war ended, when the U.S. military was demobilizing? Why include a submarine and an aircraft carrier? And why classify the operation if it was simple research? The loss of multiple aircraft and crew in 8 weeks suggests the mission encountered significant challenges beyond weather. Byrd's quote, dismissed as mistranslation, appeared in multiple sources, and the Germans' discovery of geothermal warm water regions in Antarctica raises real questions. Could a base survive there? Some claim Base 211 was a real underground facility, built by Nazi expeditions between 1939 and 45, possibly using U-boats to transport equipment and personnel. German U-boat activity in the South Atlantic is documented. U-530 and U-977 surrendered in Argentina in July and August 1945, months after Germany's surrender, with crews claiming they'd been at sea the entire time. A few researchers suggest Operation High Jump was a military assault to eliminate Nazi holdouts, and the early termination was due to unexpected resistance. More moderate theories propose the U.S. was investigating whether Germans had cached supplies or weapons in Antarctica, finding none but keeping the mission secret to avoid alarming the public. From the frozen silence of Antarctica, we return to the skies over Europe, where one of America's most famous men vanished into thin air, and no one knows why. The disappearance of Glenn Miller. He was the most famous musician in the world. His bands in the Mood and Moonlight Serenade were the soundtrack of the war. Major Glenn Miller, leader of the U.S. Army Air Forces Band, flew from England to Paris on December 15, 1944, to arrange a Christmas concert for the troops. His small plane took off from RAF Twinwood Farm. It never landed. No distress call, no wreckage, no body. 79 years later, Glenn Miller is still missing. The aircraft was a single-engine Nordøen UC-64A Norseman piloted by Flight Officer John Morgan. The flight path was England to Villacoublay, Paris. Weather was overcast and cold. Some fog was reported, but conditions weren't prohibitive. Miller was declared missing on December 16th. The U.S. military announced his death on December 24th. Official conclusion: assumed crashed in the English Channel. No search and rescue was launched. No wreckage has ever been found, despite multiple searches over decades. The official story has cracks. The flight did not appear in RAF Twinwood departure logs for December 15th. The U.S. military initially claimed they had no record of the flight. Multiple pilots flew the same route on December 15th without incident. Weather wasn't severe enough to ground other flights. The official cause cited carburetor icing, but Norseman aircraft were known for reliability in cold weather. John Morgan, the pilot, was not Miller's regular pilot and had limited cross-channel experience. Miller's departure time varies in accounts from 1:30 to 3 in the afternoon. No arrival time was recorded in Paris because the plane never arrived. In 1985, RAF navigator Fred Shaw made a startling claim. He said he saw a small plane in the area where RAF bombers were jettisoning unused bombs over the channel after an aborted raid. He believes Miller's plane was struck by falling ordnance. Despite Miller's fame, no immediate search and rescue operation was launched, unusual for a high-profile officer. Some witnesses claimed to see Miller in Paris on December 16th and 17th. The U.S. military denied this. On December 24th, German propaganda radio announced Miller was killed, claiming German fighters shot him down. This was never substantiated. Between 2017 and 2019, some U.S. military files were released showing confusion in official accounts. Key documents remain classified. Aviation historians conclude the most likely cause was engine failure due to carburetor icing combined with poor weather. The channel is cold, visibility was limited, and small aircraft in 1944 lacked sophisticated navigation equipment. If the engine failed, the pilot had minutes to ditch. The plane was light, likely broke apart on impact with water, and sank. No distress signal because it happened too fast. The wreckage could be anywhere in a vast search area, buried in sediment. The missing flight logs are bureaucratic error. Wartime record-keeping was chaotic. It's a tragic accident compounded by bad luck. But carburetor icing was a known problem. Experienced pilots took precautions. Multiple flights completed the same route safely that day. And if the plane ditched, why no debris field? The channel was heavily patrolled. Allied ships and aircraft would have spotted wreckage. Fred Shaw's friendly fire claim is compelling. RAF bombers did jettison bombs that day, though the military denied a link. Most troubling, why didn't the U.S. military conduct any search? They announced his death without evidence, without a search, within 9 days. That's not standard protocol for a major. That's cover-up protocol. The most controversial theory suggests Miller didn't die in December 1944 at all. Some claim he reached Paris, suffered a medical emergency, heart attack, or sudden illness, and died there. But the Army hid this to avoid embarrassment and maintain morale. Another theory proposes Miller was on a secret mission, possibly related to negotiations or intelligence, and was killed or captured. The plane story was a cover. A few researchers suggest Miller was involved in a scandal, financial or personal, and faked his death to avoid consequences. The German propaganda claim, though unverified, suggests German intelligence knew something. From a disappearance hidden in official silence, we turn to an operation so secret that its own military didn't know it existed until 50 years later. The Ghost Army. They carried inflatable tanks, played recordings of tank engines through loudspeakers, and wore fake insignia. They were artists, designers, and engineers disguised as soldiers. They staged entire phantom armies, complete with radio traffic, fake bivouacs, and rubber artillery, so convincing that German intelligence reported divisions that didn't exist. They were the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, also called the Ghost Army. 1,100 men who deceived the Wehrmacht for 11 months, staged over 20 deception operations, and saved an estimated 10,000 to 30,000 lives. Their work remained classified for 50 years. The unit was activated on January 20th, 1944, at Camp Forest, Tennessee. They deployed to Europe in May 1944, shortly after D-Day. From June 1944 to March 1945, they conducted over 20 major tactical deceptions across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. Official secrecy was lifted in 1996. Full records weren't released until the 2000s. In 2022, surviving members received the Congressional Gold Medal. The Ghost Army was composed of 1,100 men, many recruited from art schools including Pratt Institute and Cooper Union. Future artists Ellsworth Kelly, Bill Blass, and Art Kane served in the unit. They operated with 4 elements: visual deception using dummy tanks and artillery, sonic deception with recorded battle sounds, radio deception generating fake signal traffic, and atmosphere staging with fake unit patches and movements. Dummy M4. Sherman tanks weighed 95 pounds compared to a real tank's 66,800 pounds. They inflated in minutes and were convincing from aerial reconnaissance. Operation Viersen in March 1945 was their most significant success. The Ghost Army impersonated 2 divisions, 30,000 men, on the west bank of the Rhine, while the actual 9th Army crossed to the north. Germans focused forces at the false location. Sonic deception used recordings of tank movements, troop formations, and artillery positioning played from mobile sound trucks with 500-watt amplifiers, effective up to 15 miles away. Post-war German interrogations confirmed at least 15 operations successfully deceived Wehrmacht intelligence. The U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center estimates 10,000 to 30,000 Allied casualties were prevented through successful deceptions. Participants were bound by non-disclosure oath until 1996. Many took the secret to their graves. The Ghost Army lost fewer than 10 men despite operating close to front lines in high-risk positions. Unit photographers took extensive photos. Artists sketched operations, creating a unique visual record only released decades later. Military deception wasn't new in the Second World War. British forces used dummy tanks in North Africa. Soviets employed maskirovka extensively. The Ghost Army simply refined these techniques with American industrial capacity and artistic talent. The 50-year secrecy was standard for intelligence operations. Western militaries didn't want Soviet bloc nations learning deception tactics during the Cold War. The unit's success is impressive, but not mysterious. Its creative application of old principles. Once declassified, it became a fascinating historical footnote. But this wasn't a footnote. This was systematic, large-scale deception that altered major battles. Operation Viersen alone enabled an entire army to cross the Rhine with lighter resistance, potentially changing the war's final months. And the secrecy wasn't routine Cold War classification. Many Ghost Army veterans tried to tell their stories and were silenced by the U.S. government well into the 1990s. Some died without their families knowing what they'd done. Why guard the secret so fiercely? If it was just inflatable tanks, why the decades-long gag order? Some historians suggest the Ghost Army's activities were kept secret not because of the tactics themselves, but because of what they enabled. Sensitive intelligence operations, psychological warfare experiments, or coordination with resistance networks. Others propose the unit's methods were more sophisticated than officially admitted, possibly including early psychological operations, misinformation campaigns, or collaboration with double agents inside German intelligence. A few researchers note that some Ghost Army operations coincided with unexplained German command failures, suggesting the deceptions may have been reinforced by higher-level intelligence penetration. From deliberate illusions in Europe, we crossed the Pacific to a threat that was all too real, one that almost no one knows happened. Japanese balloon bombs. On May 5, 1945, a pregnant woman and 5 children were on a Sunday school picnic in rural Oregon. They found a strange object in the woods, tan, deflated, with Japanese characters. One of the children tugged on it. It exploded. Elsie Mitchell and 5 children died instantly, the only casualties from enemy action on the U.S. mainland during World War II. They were killed by a weapon that traveled 6,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean With no engine, no pilot, and no guidance system, Japan launched 9,000 balloon bombs at America. At least 300 reached U.S. soil, and the U.S. government censored the entire campaign, a media blackout so complete that most Americans didn't know about it until after the war ended. The first Fugo balloon bomb was launched on November 3, 1944. Approximately 9,000 balloons were launched from November 1944 to April 1945. The first confirmed landing in the United States occurred on November 4, 1944, in San Pedro, California, recovered by the Navy. On May 5, 1945, the Bly, Oregon explosion killed Elsie Mitchell, 26, and pregnant, Dick Patsky, 14, Jay Gifford, 13, Edward Engen, 13, Sherman Shoemaker, 11, and Joan Patsky, 13. Reverend Archie Mitchell, Elsie's husband, survived. Japan discontinued the program in April 1945, believing it was ineffective due to lack of American reports. Japanese records confirm 9,128 balloon bombs were launched from at least 3 sites on Honshu Island, primarily Ichinomiya. The balloons were 33 feet in diameter, crafted from laminated rice paper called washi. They carried 15 kilograms of explosive or incendiary payload. An ingenious altitude control mechanism used barometric pressure sensors. The balloons dropped ballast to rise and released gas to descend, designed to ride jet stream currents. Transit time across the Pacific was 3 to 4 days. The balloons launched at approximately 30,000 feet altitude. U.S. and Canadian military documented 342 balloon bombs, or fragments. An estimated 1,000 or more likely reached North America, but weren't found. Balloons were discovered from Alaska to Mexico, as far east as Michigan and Iowa. One was found near Detroit. In January 1945, the U.S. Office of Censorship issued a directive prohibiting any media reporting on balloon bombs. Press and radio complied completely. Japan discontinued the program in April 1945, believing it had failed because they received no U.S. reports of damage. The censorship directly caused the program's termination. U.S. military concerns were serious. They worried about biological or chemical weapon payloads. They feared forest fire damage in the Pacific Northwest. The Hanford nuclear site in Washington, where the Manhattan Project was producing plutonium for atomic bombs, was directly in the landing zone. The mainstream explanation says the Fugo campaign was ingenious, but ultimately ineffective. While the engineering was impressive, using jet stream winds to deliver weapons across 6,000 miles, the hit rate was less than 10%, and most balloons landed in remote areas causing minimal damage. The censorship was justified military strategy. By denying Japan information about landing locations and effectiveness, the U.S. caused them to abandon the campaign prematurely. The Bly deaths were tragic but isolated. Had Japan known the balloons were reaching targets, they might have deployed biological weapons or intensified the campaign. The blackout saved lives. But the censorship wasn't just about denying Japan intelligence. The military was genuinely terrified. The Hanford site, where the Manhattan Project was producing plutonium, was directly in the landing zone. If Japan had learned balloons were reaching Washington state and packed them with biological weapons or enough explosives to disrupt Hanford operations, the war's outcome could have changed, and the campaign showed a chilling possibility: intercontinental attack without aircraft, without guidance, using natural wind currents. This was 1944 technology, achieving what missiles later did. Some researchers argue the U.S. found and suppressed more balloon bombs than officially admitted, possibly hundreds more, to prevent panic. Others note that several balloons landed suspiciously close to sensitive military facilities, suggesting either remarkable luck or that Japan had better intelligence about jet stream patterns and targets than acknowledged. Post-war interviews with Japanese engineers revealed they had considered biological payloads but abandoned the idea. Some historians wonder if that's true or a convenient post-war claim. From balloons that crossed oceans in silence, to secrets buried in tunnels, to bodies that weren't who we thought, these aren't random curiosities. They're evidence of a pattern. 10 mysteries. 10 impossible questions that historians still can't answer. A Nazi device that bent physics, aerial phenomena that defied both sides, a deputy Führer who flew into madness, treasure worth billions that kills anyone who looks for it, a body that wasn't Hitler's, a masterpiece that vanished into thin air, a Nazi claim to Antarctica that triggered a massive American response, a celebrity who disappeared mid-flight, an entire army that didn't exist, and a silent weapon that crossed an ocean. What connects them? The mainstream answer is this: war creates chaos. Chaos creates mystery, and mystery invites speculation. Most of these stories, historians say, have simple explanations, accidents, propaganda, bureaucratic errors, or just lost records. The problem is human nature. We want patterns where there's randomness. We see conspiracy where there's confusion. The alternative answer is this: World War II was larger, stranger, and more secretive than we've been told. Governments kept secrets not just for security, but to control the narrative. Technologies were developed and hidden. Operations succeeded or failed in ways that never entered the official record. The winners wrote the history, and they left out the parts that didn't fit the story they wanted to tell. Maybe the truth is somewhere between. Maybe some of these mysteries have mundane explanations that will eventually emerge as archives open and new evidence surfaces. Maybe others will stay mysteries forever because the witnesses are dead, the records were burned, or the truth was too uncomfortable to preserve. What we do know is that war pushes the boundaries of what humans will do, what they'll create, and what they'll hide. And that means history. Even history as heavily documented as the Second World War has edges that remain dark. Most people watch documentaries, accept the official story, and move on. But you made it this far. That means you're not satisfied with simple answers. You recognize that behind every historical fact is a question. Who reported this? What didn't they report? What are we still not being told? This channel exists for people who refuse to accept history at face value. For people who understand that the past isn't settled. It's contested, revised, and rewritten with every archive that opens, every document declassified, every witness who finally speaks. You're not here for answers. You're here for better questions. So, here's yours. Go to the comments and pick one mystery from this list. The one that doesn't add up. The one that makes your instincts scream that something's missing. Defend your choice. Tell us why it's the key. Let's see who can build the strongest case. The floor's yours. The war ended in 1945. The battles stopped. The treaties were signed. The soldiers came home. But the secrets didn't end. They just went underground. Some are buried in tunnels beneath Poland. Some are floating in the Pacific. Some are locked in archives that won't open for another century. History isn't what happened. History is what we're allowed to know happened. In a mine in Poland, a concrete ring still stands, scarred by forces we can't explain. The bell rang. We just don't know what it was calling. If you want more mysteries, hit subscribe.